Start with Senator Cleveland.
Terrific.
Recently, you co-signed a letter urging Governor Kitzhaber to keep pursuing a CRC resolution. What does that do for Clark County? Would it be wise for us to cede that control to Oregon?
Well, Greg, we did put forward a letter. I brought copies that I'm happy to pass around and share. It's signed by a majority of the Washington State Legislature, and our purpose in submitting this letter to Governor Kitzhaber and the Oregon Legislature was to inject some substance into the discussions that have continued around the CRC and to demonstrate in black and white that there is most certainly support in the state of Washington in moving forward with replacing our antiquated Interstate 5 bridge. And so that was our goal and purpose, to communicate that.
Mm-hmm. Do you find is there support for an Oregon-backed venture without any Washington State support?
Well, yes, we don't see this new iteration or new possible path for the CRC as being necessarily only Oregon. It may well be Oregon-led at this point in time, but it still continues to be a partnership between our two states.
Yeah, it's a phased project too.
Mm-hmm.
Not only is there the Oregon side and the Oregon interchanges, but they're going to make some improvements to the SR-14 to land the bridge on the side of the river. And I think there are some agreements that both the agencies, ODOT and WDOT, can make some arrangements. And we've got the legal opinion. I think that's all to the Attorney General. That's okay.
And the thing that people forget is that it's not without historical precedent to do it this way. That most interstate bridges do have one state being in the lead and being the primary agent for the tolls or what have you.
Right.
And I never, I try never to give up on the idea of being part of the process. The fact that we couldn't do the heavy lifting that needed to be done in this state for obvious reasons doesn't mean that we're going to abdicate our voice and the voice of the people that live in this region.
But under that plan, what kind of voice would the people in this region have?
Well, I think they'll have definitely through the agencies, through WDOT and ODOT, will have us making sure that WDOT is cognizant of the tolls and toll setting, because they have to come to an agreement through the process of WDOT and ODOT. So there is that voice. There's also the voice that quite honestly, that they've been a process of for the last 15 years through the locally preferred alternative, through the yes votes of 6 different agencies, I think, of elected officials, both on both sides of the river. So people have had their voice heard, I think, very distinctly throughout the entire process of
And I would add to that,
CRC.
Greg, that the Washington State Transportation Commission as well will have a seat at the table in the discussions with Oregon regarding tolls and toll setting. And in fact, we have a member of our community here in Southwest Washington who sits on that commission, Philip Parker. So we'll most certainly have a voice.
I think that's one of the things that I'm hearing is that, are we going to have a seat at the table for toll setting? So that's good to know.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about this $175 million that the letter says that we can't afford to walk away from.
Mm-hmm.
If this thing was a pile of horse dung, you'd walk away from $175 million, wouldn't you?
Well, $175 million worth of horse dung, yeah, but $175 million worth of 15 years of study and a locally preferred alternative and a environmental EIS and a permit and so forth. I'm not sure that's $175 worth of horse dung.
$1 million, but well, yeah, that's understood. But when you see this letter and hear people talking about how difficult it is to walk away, it feels it feels uncomfortable to make that the point. It feels uncomfortable to make the point that we've already spent $175 million, and you know, we can't afford to walk away from it, because there's another couple of $1 billion on the other end that, although nobody would have liked to spend $175 million for nothing.
I think that's cheap.
Well, you're kind of a, you know, a tax and spend kind of a guy,
No,
so
I think that-
175 million is cheap to you, but.
No, I think that's cheap for the state of Washington. I think if you take a look at the 520 bridge, we spent $450 million coming up with a design and a conference and a debate about that bridge in Seattle. That's like half of what less than half than what we.
Jim, everything is relative, because Seattle creates this mess, $450 million mess. So we're in good shape because we only create $150 million.
No, I didn't say that. I said I think that's cheap, though.
Cheap, okay. But anyway, you're not hanging your hat on the idea that we've spent this money. We just blindly have to go forward.
I'm not hanging my hat that we have to spend.
No, I think that I'm only speaking for myself here. Regardless of how critical you are of the process, regardless of how the things that if I could wave a magic wand, there'd be elements of this final proposal that would be different. And I have no idea what, some of those things I've looked into to find out why they weren't feasible. Others are still, maybe possibilities down the road, depending on what happens with the Oregon piece. But when we say we don't want to walk away from what has been done, it doesn't mean we have to agree that everything has been done well and that we agree with everything that has been done. But a lot of it is necessary work no matter what we do. And we don't, there is that kind of squishy risk out there that we're going to have to give some of that money back, and it's hard to evaluate whether that's going to happen or not. And there's a whole lot of heavy lifting that has to be done if this is going to go forward. But there were a lot of constraints on this project, geographical constraints, political constraints, and the reality is that projects of the past that we think are iconic, beautiful projects wouldn't have been able to be built at all today with the public process that's required of all projects. They would have probably not come out looking as good because they would have been done by a committee. And the reality is that we have evolved into communities that are, thanks to the internet and public process, people think they're in a direct democracy, but our structure is still a representative democracy. And if you are a representative, you have to make those hard calls and do the very best you can. And I believe that if you stretch it out long enough, people will come in and second guess everything you do. Mm-hmm. And the reason that I have refrained from throwing my wonderful creative ideas into the mix is that I don't want to sound like these people who are throwing ideas into the mix just to stop it because they aren't really flexible. I think that we have to mitigate risk. We have to look at changes that make sense. We are not inflexible. But we also, don't want to pretend that what we've committed to doesn't mean anything.
But you have to move forward.
That's right. And what alarms me about some of the opposition and the arguments that we've heard that change quite frequently is that there does seem to be a lack of respect for the process. This has been, and the process that's followed for mega projects around the country is very clear. Not to say that it's not a very long process,
or
but
painful.
There are reasons for that, so that you do get hopefully to the most sound project at the end of the day. And what is bothersome to me is that the opposition was very quiet back 5 years ago when the locally preferred alternative was chosen by the 39 members of the Project Sponsors Council, and light rail was the chosen form of transit for the project moving forward. And that now 5 years later, when we're at virtually the very last step in this long process, the opposition can then rise up again and find ways to politically stop the project. That's bothersome.
A couple of things to interject. One, Jim, I'm not sure you want to use the 520 bridge as any sort of fiscal sanity.
That's true.
But,
But it's a long process that has been very, very expensive for this state.
Sure.
$500 million is a chunk of change.
yes, it certainly is.
Yeah,
and
and
that
that's-
one is growing.
Yeah.
So. But Sharon, is there anything that can be done to make this an iconic, beautiful bridge that might garner more support?
I don't think the shape of the bridge at this point means anything. And if it functions, it's beautiful to me. You know, it is what we have to do. You know, it is what we have to do. And I think that if the arguments over whether it was beautiful enough had continued, I think the fight would have been just as ugly as the current fight is. But function and compromise is where we are. We have an airport. We have a city footprint that we want to protect. We have an archaeological site. We have a need for through commerce, bicycles, connection to a very expensive system that's already been built out that I'm comfortable with, and those who know me know that I moved from Seattle to Oregon right when the MAX was about to. I actually moved less than a block away from the eastern terminus of MAX. 3 weeks before it started, and in the house hunting process, everybody complained about MAX. MAX this, MAX this. The realtors hated MAX. They wanted their freeway with all of their buyouts of their property and all of that. I mean, they were really hateful comments about MAX. And a month later, after it had been running for a week, it was our MAX. Let's take MAX. And so my kids grew up taking MAX. So I'm not afraid of that. But if there are problems with people's fears and security, then we deal with those. We deal with people. They're dealt with all over the world.
But even beyond the security issues, is light rail a fiscally sound policy?
It depends. If you say over the next 15 years, is it fiscally sound? That's a different answer than if you say next 150 years.
And I think it also depends upon where it's being used. Sometimes, bus rapid transit is a more effective way to get people from point A to point B than light rail. And you leave it to the experts to determine which works best in which area. Sometimes bus rapid transit, sometimes light rail, sometimes buses themselves work best. It's kind of like you leave it to the people.
But is this plan a result of the experts, or is it just a matter of TriMet wanting to expand its reach?
Well, I personally think that both are true. That we have a functioning 56 miles of light rail on the other side of the river, and we're expanding that reach, if you will, to this side of the river. And I think that's a legitimate thing for this region to do. If we want to be an economic player in what I see as Seattle, Tacoma, Spokane, and Portland, Vancouver, then we're going to have to join Portland and join them transit-wise, in addition to just being on the other side of the Columbia River.
And Greg, the data is clear in my mind. I used to work for CTRAN. I used to work for former U.S. Secretary of Transportation, for that matter, the data is clear that when you invest in transit as well as roads and bridges, you maximize that investment in the vast return that you see in economic development and growth. And for me, that's what is most attractive about investing in light rail and bringing it across the river.
Yeah, for me, I as much as I enjoy riding the train, if I were at that table when this locally preferred alternative was made, I might have come down on the side of the flexibility of buses. Honestly, I might have. But what was the clincher for me recently is that Metro has developed a couple of studies that they've actually updated that show that we're more likely to gain jobs and businesses, new businesses on this side because we have the space, we have a good tax system from a business perspective, and that if there's a free flow and we're connected to the regional transportation system, we actually have more to gain than Portland in terms of property values, jobs here, and a balance of flow, not all going to Portland, but some coming to Clark County. So those kinds of studies are fairly compelling to me, and frankly, the folks in Portland weren't that crazy about, talking about that.
No.
Let me ask, and I'd like an answer from all three of you if I could. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 meaning that this is going to be a done deal soon, and 1 being it's barely got a prayer, what are the chances of this Oregon-led deal actually coming to fruition? And Jim, I'll take your first number.
I get to start out?
Right, you've got to close yours, so you can't count it.
Well, I would say...
Wait, I need a number first, and then you go on.
okay.
Because sometimes you forget. 3?
3.
Okay. All right, a number?
2.
And
5. I
Okay,
guess
so
I'm
you
the
got-
optimist.
yeah, okay, so 50-50 shot at the optimist. Okay, so it sort of sounds to me like this deal ain't going to happen. So where do we go?
No, I
Well,
think...
3 is not a good number.
No, it's not. There's always a Hail Mary. Isn't there?
Counting on the Hail Mary. Okay. Well, how do we get this thing done? It doesn't sound to me like you're going to put all your eggs in the basket
But it's
of
not-
Oregon leading this.
But it's not our eggs anymore.
Well, but from a philosophical standpoint, if you want the bridge, those are your eggs.
No. Quite honestly, if my ideas about the bridge died when we adjourned without a revenue package in the Senate. And quite honestly, as long as we're not being a player at the table, as far as that's concerned, as far as paying our fair share, then we need to focus on this side of the river and let Oregon do what it needs to do regarding the bridge.
Right, but you don't think that's got too good of a chance of happening, so where do we go from here?
My personal belief is that I think we suck it up for another decade of paying taxes, of higher gas taxes for one, and we remain a donor county where we give our money to Seattle and the Tacoma area, and we don't see any of it down here.
Okay. How do you respond to it not happening to happening?
I agree with Jim up to a point. We were always a donor county, and so I think that for me, I make the case for the other many projects. There will never be enough gas tax money to meet our transportation needs. So whatever package comes out and whatever revenue is available, I want to make sure that we get what we need in as fair a manner as possible.
Well, the other aspect that continues to plague me really is that if the Oregon path doesn't pan out, we've then lost almost $1 billion in federal funding that we have no guarantee of ever qualifying for again. So even if we do reset, if you will, and start over, I don't see any attempts at replacing the antiquated Interstate 5 bridge happening again within another decade or so.
Okay, so
And-
let me just one follow-up
Sure.
question to that. Because if I were trying to write the lead to this story, it sounds to me as though the three of you are saying we're willing to move beyond all of this bridge stuff and move away from that and move toward what are the other needs of Clark County. Is that a fair thing to say?
For myself, yes, that is a fair thing to say.
The only I would say the same, but the only caveat is that I was surprised that this got this far, that the Oregon proposal got this far, and I'm more than willing to be surprised. And if there's ways that we can get back at the get back to the table, and move things along, and put this together, I'm willing to roll up my sleeves and try to do that.
I would
You
say
don't
that.
think that's likely at this point?
Well, I think that, you know, I know Peter Courtney, and Peter Courtney now is the big political rock in the road in terms of the Oregon legislature. If his caucus agrees that they're willing to step up again, and that their treasurer says that the risk is not unacceptable, they have different kind of bonding capacity and different financial capacity because of the different tax base. And so if they, you know, if all the stars line up, Peter will do what his caucus and what his group wants him to do. He will change his mind.
But that's a big if.
I think that, you know, anything's possible. I mean, if I didn't think it was possible, my number would be 0. It wouldn't be. It wouldn't.
2 isn't that great.
Sure. And don't forget that, the 2 governors, both our states, continue to recognize the importance of this project, not just to our region, but nationally.
But there are other things that have to be done in Clark.
Absolutely.
And
There are.
you're willing to
That's true.
appreciate the dynamic that's at play here. Not great odds. Let's
Right.
get something for Clark.
Absolutely.
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 Agreed.
Fiercely,
In
absolutely.
fact, I think Annette has a list of projects that we're looking at.
We do.
It's a
We
good
do.
segue.
Yes.
So,
very
so
good.
does that list of projects begin to approach a return on investment balance
question,
point
Scott.
where it would justify a 10-cent a gallon increase?
That's a good question. We continue to have those discussions because we do feel that whatever investments proposed for Clark County within a transportation revenue package should at least equal the $450 million that we'd originally hoped for to fund the CRC project. So
The state
this
was
list
willing to do
is very much in flux right now. It's a draft. We're working with the partners here in the community. Obviously, you know, the Clark County Governmental Affairs Roundtable and Transportation Alliance works in collaboration with our public partners to put the list together. So we have worked closely with them.
And
to
if the compromises
develop a list.
reduce that pot, then we would have to make the argument that we don't get disproportionately hurt by that reduction. I have to say that our colleagues in the other parts of the state are real sick of the fight that we're having down here. You know, they think it's nuts, and they're tired of it. And so we're still, you know, part of our job is representing our people here, but we're also trying to represent our people elsewhere when they don't understand what the political dynamics and what the fight's been all about.
Well, if it's any consolation to them, we're more sick of it than they are. Regardless of which side you're on. I mean,
And you're here. Yet you're here. Thank you. I think I'll know whether I thank you when I see the story.
Annette, I want to go back just for a second. You mentioned the possibility of losing the prospect of federal funding. Would it be worth it to build a bridge that's light rail ready but doesn't include light rail at this point?
Well, unfortunately, that's not an option. The option before us has to be the project as it was approved in the December 2011 Record of Decision. That Record of Decision was the project with light rail. And so if we were to attempt to remove light rail and insert bus rapid transit, for instance, that then starts the
Back at the
process
beginning.
over again. And so therein lies the problem. And it's not that, this is, I can't stress enough, a compromise project that's evolved over the course of well over a decade. And the time for us to make our menu choices at the buffet long ago passed. And in fact, I was struck by what the gentleman from the FTA stated at the recent meeting of the Joint Legislative CRC Oversight Committee here in Vancouver. And when he was asked the question, well, what happens when a project of this magnitude is stopped at this point? And he said, it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So
And
I
my
guess we're breaking
understanding
new
is that
ground here in Clark County.
when Seattle didn't get their act together, that's when MARTA came into being in Atlanta. That's why Atlanta has MARTA, because Seattle didn't step up.
When you say goes back, are you saying goes back a year, 2, 3, 10, 15? I mean, certainly you're not going to go back. And let's just say you took light rail out of the mix,
Mhm.
and everything else stayed the same. How far back would you go?
You can go back to the beginning. You can go back to a locally preferred alternative, and you'd go back 15 years.
That seems ludicrous to me.
That's how it starts.
Yeah.
That's how you gather together, people together from both sides of the river, and you start talking about alternatives. And although a lot of it has already been completed, and you might want to go right to the question of transit, you really have started the process from the very beginning again, and you're going to have a different president by the time it comes around to funding
Mhm.
again. The CRC is part of his dashboard projects of 3 or 4.
And I believe the
You
basis
can't
for
wait.
that is sound, because it is meant to try to promote some consistency, some stability, recognizing that these mega projects do take years to plan and move forward.
But it sort of eliminates the possibility of breaking it into maybe smaller projects that are a little more acceptable, perhaps, to the locals. In other words, this is a $3.5 billion project. You can probably build a bridge
And
for $1 billion.
theoretically, that makes perfect sense, but if you look at Public Works contracting and trends, the biggest savings and the biggest advantage and biggest chance to bring something in under budget and on time and appropriately is using techniques such as design build. And it's complicated to do it that way, but that's how projects, that's the trend. And the state has very reluctantly allowed bigger counties and universities to use that kind of technique. When you fragment it, you increase the costs, you increase the chances for error. When you combine your construction and your design and your all of those pieces together in a unit, in a unified way, you save money. And that's one of the reforms that has worked nationally over the last 20 years.
Now, talking about the need to do the project as a whole, would this project as it stands do anything to mitigate traffic? You aren't adding more lanes and you still run into the Rose Quarter down there.
Well, I think the process is that you're always improving the corridor, no matter where that's at, whether it's in the Rose Quarter or whether it's in the Hayden Island area or whether it's north of us. The fact is, if you wait until you've got a chance to improve it all, you'll be waiting forever. You improve what you have the money for at the moment. I think a statement was made that you probably build a bridge for $1 billion.
Mhm.
I think that's true. In fact, the bridge itself costs about $900 million.
Yeah, I think that's right.
That's right.
It's the interchanges on both sides that cost the other $1 billion to $2 billion. And what Oregon is proposing is that they completely redo their Hayden Island exchange, plus all the Oregon advances, and the bridge, $2.7 billion. And that's what's been studied, is the people getting on and off within a 5-mile area. That's what all the modeling is done. And as Sharon pointed out, this is how you save dollars when you're talking about these kinds of projects over a 5-mile stretch.
And
Over the
it's-
I'm sorry, go
And
ahead.
currently, the bridge is 3 lanes on each side, and now it's going to be, for this, 5.
5 on
So
each
that
side.
would be,
Yeah.
So it is big. It
And-
is bigger, and there will be more continuous transit
Yeah, I mean,
to take people
and
off.
you only have to drive the bridge now to visually, recognize that the bridge is a pinch point.
Mhm.
And the minute you come off on the northbound side, traffic opens up again.
Yeah, and everybody complains about the Oregon side, but I have, my mother just died this summer, but I was going over to see her in Portland several times a week for the last 2 years. And the Delta Park piece was a real thorn in my side. I would gnash my teeth every time I went. And then when they finished the project, no more problem. I mean, it was amazing. There were other choke points, but that one little piece made a huge difference in my going over to Portland. One little project, and it wasn't a very complicated project. Probably very expensive, but not as expensive as others. So every little piece can make a difference in the traffic flow.
And you probably recall that during the course of this discussion regarding CRC, the Delta Park area was designated as a pinch point, a problem, and in fact, it's one of the reasons Oregon's moved forward and widened that area in advance of
Well,
a
it
new
took us
bridge.
nearly 30 years to get them to add one lane onto Delta Park. I'm hopefully that we won't have to wait another 30 years to get another bridge built. And quite honestly, here we are at the point. Everything's lined up. We have all the permits. We just need the funding, and we need a state to step up to the plate and say we're willing to take that on.
Yeah, and on the question of tolls is when we talk about people digging their heels in the sand, being firm about our commitment and my commitment doesn't mean that I'm not looking for ideas all the time. I sat down with an individual who lives in this community who was once head of the tolling authority in Illinois, and he's an engineer. And he said, in other states, they load the tolls by axle, so that the trucks, if you just tolled trucks on both bridges, where they do the wear and tear, they need the commerce, they need the throughway. And they are the ones putting the bridge at risk other than an earthquake. It takes a truck to knock out one of those struts. Other states load those tolls onto those multi-axle trucks. And that way, the people that live close by aren't bearing the whole burden. Now, I have not yet made the phone call to find out what the tolling analysis covered in this area and whether that was discussed and whether those numbers are available. But I will.
Realistically, how much would tolls be for standard passenger cars?
Well, that hasn't been decided yet at all.
I
Much less than what the other side is saying.
Well, that's why I
It's
asked.
not $8, I don't think, which is whatever.
I can tell you that, again, with the 520, I went up there. I didn't have a transponder at the time. I went across during 4 o'clock and back at 5 o'clock, and so probably peak hours. And it was mailed to me. The fine or toll was mailed to me. Since I didn't have a transponder, it was $8.25 to go back and forth.
For a round trip.
If I'd had a transponder, it would have been like $4 round trip, half the cost. Of course, they wouldn't have had a private enterprise mail me a ticket and everything like that nature. So.
But I would certainly say, sitting in traffic, stopped on the bridge, how much would you spend in wasted gas and time, and certainly the bridge that's there now was paid for by tolls. I mean, our parents, our grandparents were willing to make that investment in us to ensure our future. It's concerning to me that there aren't others in this community who are willing to turn around and make that same investment in their children and their grandchildren's
But I
future.
think my impression is, I think most people can agree to some sort of toll. I think the concern is the amount. And as you mentioned, the estimates have been widely varying on that.
Yeah, they certainly have been.
And-
Although,
and I
there'll
think
be
widely
choice. There'll be
exaggerated
choice.
in
If
some.
light rail is part of the bridge, you can choose to take light rail and not pay a toll, or take another route. So.
Those who use the bridge, I think tolls are probably the most conservative aspect of any kind of local financing.
User fee.
Right.
Yeah.
Those who use the bridge help pay for the bridge.
Sure. So, anyone else?
Just
Well,
talking
you have
about
other
tolls.
projects?
We do have other projects. I mean, we obviously think that there's additional investment that needs to be made in our community. So we have a long list, actually, of projects that we'd like to see included in any kind of revenue package. And
What would be number one on that list?
well, given that it's in our district, the Mill Plain and Fourth Plain interchanges on I-5 I think need to be improved. And the remainder of these projects are all over the community, but obviously our transportation system is very interconnected, and so we need to see improvements on SR 14 and I-205 to 164th Street. That needs to be widened. I don't know if any of you live in East County, but that's a choke point rush hour. SR 500 intersections at 42nd Avenue and 54th Avenue. We need to make additional investments in SR 500. Camas Washougal SR 14 widening. And the West Slough project, those are out east, obviously on 6th and 32nd Streets. Clark County, Northeast 10th Avenue from 149th to 164th. Whipple Creek project. A little bit further north, Clark County Interstate 5 and 179th Street interchange is an important infrastructure
So how
investment
do we
project.
go about getting some financing for these? Do you
Well-
think the legislature will be amenable to that?
Discussions continue on a transportation revenue package. The governor, as you're well aware, recently restated that he'd like to call a special session in November if there were agreement to move a revenue package forward. We've been working with our delegation in Southwest Washington to narrow down the list of priorities and advocate for funding to be included in any kind of revenue package to help invest in
And I'm going to be, in any revenue package, I'm going to be looking to the state. I'm going to be advocating that the state do more revenue sharing with local governments, whether it's the beer tax or anything else. The state, as the state has gotten more squeezed, they've balanced the budget on the backs of our cities and counties. And so, looking to a package that has some revenue sharing for our locals. To not just fix the state roads, but to fill in the holes, the literal holes in our community streets, I think is really important, and it's fair.
Well, hasn't there been also some discussion about the idea that in order to get a revenue package approved, that there may be some winnowing down of governmental workforce, particularly in the engineering department, that the state oversees to try and find some balance between revenue increases and expense decreases? Have you heard any of that?
What I have heard is that there is a study currently going on in transportation, because Washington has the most expensive transportation projects in the nation,
Right.
and the Republicans wanted to find out why. Because
Well, don't you want to find out why?
they're loaded for bear because they believe it's the labor.
Well, don't you want to find out why?
Of course I want to find out why, but I don't believe it's the labor.
What is it?
Well, what they're finding out, and amazingly enough, is that the sales tax that we charge on all materials and the labor included is looking like it's a primary driver for that expense at the moment. It's not our prevailing wage, and it's not that I think the Republicans got excited about that they thought it was going to be.
But I mean, do you believe that there is going to need to be some sort of expense reduction in reform in order to get approval of a gasoline tax increase?
I think that my personal belief is I think there will have to be some reform, and I think that it calls for reform too. And I'm very much looking forward to the end of December when the full report comes out. But at this particular point, with preliminary data that's there, it doesn't look like our labor force, and certainly not the apprenticeship aspect of the labor force is causing it.
I think what people don't realize is how many bills come forward to save money, and they are mini reform, MI reforms. Every session, departments the governor's office, legislators, people acting on tips from employees, come up with different pieces of legislation. This one saves a little money here. This one so everybody likes to bring something forward that saves some money. But I've been a risk manager in the public sector, and I've been a city administrator, and I this is just my own observation, is sometimes your private contractors look at government funded organizations as deep pockets to gouge and to charge what the traffic will bear, and sometimes the critical personnel salaries are based on the minimum that you can get somebody that looks qualified on paper. I know I've done those recruitments, and sometimes those people aren't the best at monitoring those private contracts. You run a business here. I bet sometimes you get gouged on your paper or your supplies, and it takes vigilance to prevent that from happening. And the more you contract out, and the more complex the item that you contract out, the more the risk is, and the more you have to monitor that risk.
I would say, if the intent of reform is to continuously improve quality and efficiency, then absolutely I support that. Of course, that in my other life I work in healthcare. That's something that we work on every single day. I would venture to guess that's something that you as an organization work on every single day as well. But you have to also ensure that as you keep your eyes on efficiencies and quality improvement, that you don't stop the presses or stop, so to speak, stop the process and revisit every decision over and over and over, so that you don't ever make any progress and move forward and get to the goal.
Sometimes it's more important to make that decision and get moving than to wait for a perfect decision that everybody agrees with.
My understanding was that Washington State was the highest, or one of the highest in the country, but I think I recall that we were as much as double some other states. Sales tax is 10%. Where's the rest of it?
It depends on
your guess?
The environmental reviews, between 1% and 45%.
Between 1 and 45% on the environmental side?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Because depending on where most of the projects are under $5 million. There's 3% of the project drive 45% of the costs in the state. So these mega projects like the CRC, like the 167, like the 520 bridge, they're the projects that drive the majority of the costs. That's what we're going to be paying the majority of our gas tax to go towards. So most of these projects that Annette was talking about fall much, much less than that. But the whole study is going to actually be out on the 31st of December. And you can have this, it's kind of like the preliminaries.
Is there anything else that we should ask? Anything we've missed?
Is there anything you should ask?
Yes, have we missed any questions?
What's our message? I think to wrap this, to summarize it up, would be that certainly the representation in the 49th district is very much concerned about its constituents, and but we also are concerned about the future and the future of this legislative district and of the CRC, because that's part of it. I mean, to say that we're not part of Portland and that this river divides us, I think is a mistake. I think it unites us, actually, rather than divides us.
Maybe just a little off topic, but Jim, how do you respond to people who say that elected officials shouldn't be running for freehold? You're running for freehold.
Huh?
How do you respond to those who say that elected officials?
You're the only ones who.
Yeah, right. You ought to keep your nose out of common people's work, freeholders and
This is the
well, how do you respond to saying elected officials should be running for freeholder?
Well, we have the experience of
But
being-
haven't you guys mucked things up?
No, actually, I think we're doing pretty darn good.
Oh, okay. I'm not sorry.
You must be thinking of Rhiannon
Actually, I did not run for freeholder, and I kind of disagree with Jim. But the answer to your question, Lou, is that the state gives a lot of money to local government, and we end up with kind of a bird's eye view of local government, and a lot of us come from local government one way or another. And as long as the state is helping to pay for local government, we want it to run really, really well. And being involved as a citizen, we are a citizen legislature, and I do believe that there is no citizen activity that we should not do.
So if Jim got elected to freeholder, would it run really, really well?
I think this process has the possibility of making it improved, and I voted for Jim because I think that he will represent my interests.
Okay.
So I did vote for this guy.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You didn't ask how everybody voted.
That says it all.
By the way, I lost my first election to freeholder in 1983. That was the first time that I ever ran for public office. And the Columbian said that we like his youthful enthusiasm, we wish he'd stay involved.
Yeah, but you're an old guy now.
That was then. That was then.
But still enthusiastic.
How did you lose your way?
And I lost my hair.
And your youth. Oh.
That's back when there was actually money available.
Yeah, in 1983.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for
Thank
coming in.
you.
Appreciate it. Thank you for
It's
your
really a
time.
pleasure to have this
Yes.
conversation instead of being grilled as somebody running
Well,
for office. I like this so much better. It's so much easier.
That time will come, I'm sure.
Apparently, we weren't hard enough on you.
Yeah.
I'll
We
remember
want to
that.
come back. That's right. Oh, well, thank you for your time.
Oh,
Appreciate
thank
the
you.
opportunity.
I'll just, coffee again.